Robert Thompson never expected to confront the wild in such a personal way. A middle-aged logger in British Columbia, he'd always viewed black bears as majestic but distant inhabitants of the forests he worked in. Yet one fateful day, a single choice would lead him down a path that interwove his life with that of a solitary bear cub. Over time, their unlikely bond deepened, transforming Robert's sense of purpose and reshaping his understanding of nature's fierce beauty. But as this astonishing friendship evolved, neither man nor bear could escape the fateful twist that awaited them both, an ending no one could have foreseen. The clamor of saws and the heavy scent of fresh-cut timber dominated Robert Thompson's days. At 50 years old, he'd spent much of his life working as a logger in the vast conifer forests near the Skeena River in British Columbia. Tall and broad-shouldered, with calloused hands and a weathered face, Robert found solace in the still moments between the roar of machinery, when all he could hear was the wind weaving through pines and the faint calls of distant ravens. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Robert headed out after his shift ended, hoping to find a quiet spot by a tributary of the Skeena to fish for steelhead trout. Though the season was nearing its end, he relished these solitary hours under the amber canopy, a welcome break from the relentless grind. Trudging through a maze of fallen logs and ferns, he noticed an unusual hush settling over the woodland. Birds had ceased their chatter, and even the wind seemed hesitant. Robert's instincts prickled. Wildlife in these parts could be shy or unpredictable, especially black bears fattening up before hibernation. Yet something else tugged at his attention, a soft whimpering, so faint he almost missed it. Following the sound, Robert came upon a small clearing strewn with branches from a recent storm. At its edge lay a fallen cedar, uprooted and splintered. Beside the trunk, he spotted a dark, furry shape, barely moving. Heart pounding, he inched closer, half expecting the mother bear to roar in warning. But the scene remained still. The creature on the ground was a bear cub, no bigger than a medium-sized dog, with tufts of glossy black fur and wide, fearful eyes. One of its hind legs was pinned beneath a tangle of branches. Its shallow breaths and the raw scrape across its muzzle hinted at how long it had struggled. Robert knew the risks. Mother bears, even if out of sight, could be fiercely protective. Yet as minutes passed, no adult bear appeared. His gut twisted at the cub's ragged whines. "I can't leave it like this," he thought. Checking carefully for any sign of a nearby sow, he gently tested the branches trapping the cub's leg. The wood shifted, and the cub let out a weak, frightened moan. Steeling his resolve, Robert used all his might to roll the heavy cedar limb just enough to free the cub. As soon as its leg was released, the little bear scrambled to sit up, trembling. Blood matted its fur near the paw, and though no bone protruded, swelling suggested a painful sprain or fracture. The cub tried to limp away, but collapsed with a mewl that struck Robert's heart. He stood there, uncertain of what to do next. Returning to work left the cub at risk of predators or infection. Yet, bringing a wild bear to camp was an idea that reeked of trouble. Torn between fear and compassion, Robert slowly approached, arms outstretched in a gesture of solace. "Easy," he murmured, voice soft. "I'm not here to hurt you." The cub blinked, exhausted, seeming to sense his intention, and with that single trembling glance, Robert's life shifted in ways he could never have imagined. The late afternoon light filtered through golden leaves, bathing the clearing in a warm glow that belied the rawness of the situation. The cub's shallow breathing and the ugly scrape on its paw made Robert's stomach clench. He was no veterinarian, but even he knew that a wild animal in this condition, young, injured, and alone, had slim odds of survival if left in the wilderness. Yet he also recalled the official guidelines about wild animals. Never approach a bear cub unless it's absolutely necessary. And if one must intervene, the right action was to call wildlife authorities. The problem? The nearest conservation office was over an hour's drive, and he had no cell signal out here. Besides, it was nearly dusk. By the time he fetched help, if he could even find a ranger on short notice, the cub might succumb to its injuries or become prey. The cub tried again to stand, whimpering as its injured leg buckled. Robert stood rooted, battling a swirl of conflicting emotions. He had a healthy respect for nature's laws. He'd seen colleagues or neighbors lose limbs, or worse, to bear encounters. But something about this vulnerable creature, with its trembling body and desperate gaze, kindled a protective spark in him. Finally, he let out a long exhale. I'll take it home for the night, just to clean the wound and keep it safe. Then first thing tomorrow, I'll contact a wildlife rehab center. He reasoned that this small act of compassion outweighed the risk, as long as he was careful. Yet a gnawing voice warned him that once he stepped across this line, returning to normalcy might not be so simple. Gently, he removed his flannel shirt and wrapped it around the cub, wary of its tiny claws and sharper teeth. The cub gave a feeble snarl but didn't resist much, weak from pain and hunger. It sank against Robert's chest. He felt its heartbeat fluttering like a frightened bird. The warmth of the cub's body startled him. It was so undeniably alive, depending on him now for help. It was an awkward trek back to his truck, the cub shifting in his arms. Every snapped twig made Robert's pulse race. He half expected an enraged mother bear to burst from the undergrowth at any moment, but the forest remained ominously silent. Once at the battered pickup, he carefully placed the cub in a large plastic bin lined with an old blanket. The creature let out a startled yelp, but soon settled, as if resigned. Robert climbed into the driver's seat, hands trembling on the wheel. His mind replayed the day's events in a loop. A mere hour earlier, he'd only wanted a quiet evening by the river, fishing rod in hand. Now, he was speeding down a dirt road with an orphaned, or at least motherless, bear cub. In the back, the moral weight of his decision pressing down like a storm cloud. Glimpses of the setting sun glowed in his rearview mirror, and he couldn't help but feel that life, as he knew it, was sliding inexorably into the past. Little did he know just how far this single act of kindness would carry him, and just how profound the consequences would be. The cabin Robert called home sat near the edge of an old logging road, a modest structure of wood and stone he'd inherited from his father. Surrounded by towering cedars and a small clearing that sloped toward a trickling creek, it offered both solitude and a sense of belonging. But as Robert pulled into the gravel driveway, the presence of a bear cub in his truck made it feel strangely unfamiliar, like he was trespassing into uncharted territory. A tangerine sunset painted the sky, and the crisp evening air carried the scent of resin and damp earth. Robert carefully carried the plastic bin inside, setting it down near the fireplace. Flicking on a lamp, he watched the cub blink in the sudden brightness, its small, rounded ears pressed back anxiously. The flannel shirt remained wrapped around its body, stained with a bit of dried blood and forest debris. He rummaged through his limited first aid supplies, cursing himself for not having anything more substantial. A clean dish towel, a half bottle of antiseptic, and some gauze would have to do for a makeshift bandage. Kneeling beside the bin, he reached in with slow, deliberate movements, murmuring reassuring nonsense. The cub let out a faint growl when he touched its injured paw, but it lacked the strength to do much more. Heart pounding, Robert gently cleaned the scrape, wincing at the ragged edges of skin. The cub flinched, but the antiseptic's sting was unavoidable. Finally, he wrapped a loose strip of gauze around the paw, hoping to keep dirt out until he could consult a professional. The entire task made him sweat with tension, yet something stirred in him an odd tenderness that he hadn't felt in a long time. Next came the problem of feeding it. What do bear cubs even eat? He recalled reading somewhere that young bears, if orphaned, often consumed formula at rehabilitation centers. Of course, he had no specialized formula. In a pinch, he warmed up some diluted cow's milk and a bit of mashed fish from his fridge, presenting it in a shallow bowl. The cub sniffed, gave a tentative lick, then lapped hungrily. Relief flooded Robert at the sight. At least it wouldn't go hungry tonight. Once the cub had eaten, its eyelids drooped with exhaustion. Robert debated what to do for a sleeping arrangement. Leaving it in the bin felt safer for both of them, but the cabin wasn't exactly bear-proof. He glanced at the meager lock on his front door and the flimsy windows. If the cub panicked or grew bigger overnight, though that was hardly rational, he might have a serious problem. But for now, the creature was so worn out it could barely keep its head up. As the night deepened, Robert lit a small fire in the stone fireplace. The cozy glow danced on the cabin's log walls, illuminating the cub's form curled in the bin. Outside, a breeze shook the pines, sending soft whispers through the darkness. Robert sank onto his worn armchair, face buried in his hands, 1,000 questions spinning through his mind. What if the mother is still alive and searching? What if authorities fine him for harboring wildlife? But above all, one question hammered at his conscience. Was I meant to find this cub? Or did fate just trap me in a complicated kindness? Lulled by crackling flames, Robert finally dozed off, dreaming of a shadowy forest where man and bear roamed side by side. He couldn't yet fathom that this fragile, vulnerable creature would soon transform his life in ways both wondrous and heartbreaking. Sunlight filtered through the cabin's thin curtains, rousing Robert from a restless sleep. The fire in the hearth had burned down to embers, and the chill of an early morning draught pricked his skin. Heart pounding, he remembered the night's events and quickly scanned the room. The plastic bin remained where he'd left it, now with a small black head peering over the edge. The cub blinked at him, ears perked in a quizzical look. Its expression was neither fearful nor entirely comfortable, somewhere in between. Robert exhaled. Surprised at the wave of relief, he felt that the cub hadn't tried to flee or wreck the place in the night. The improvised bandage still covered its paw, a bit askew but intact. Determined to do the right thing, Robert picked up his phone. As suspected, no bars out here. He'd have to drive closer to town for a signal or physically go in to see a wildlife officer. But he hesitated, a knot of worry in his gut. If he reported the cub right away, they'd likely confiscate it and place it in a rehab facility. That was the legal, rational course of action. Yet a flicker of doubt emerged. The region's wildlife centers were overburdened, and sometimes adult bears reared too comfortably around humans were deemed unreleasable. Would that be this cub's fate? With a groan, he shook off the indecision. Let's see how the cub's leg is doing first. He gently lowered the bin's side. The cub hobbled out, favoring its injured limb, sniffing at the worn wooden floor. Robert crouched, arms at the ready in case it panicked. Slowly the cub tottered around, investigating the scents of the cabin dust, cooking oil, traces of Robert's own sweat. A few times it glanced at him, as if seeking reassurance. Over the next few days, an unspoken routine formed. Each morning, Robert fed the cub a mix of softened dog kibble, bits of fish, and warm milk, all while searching for some official solution. But the phone lines or signals were spotty, and by the time he managed to get through to the nearest wildlife rehab facility, the staff informed him they were overloaded. We can't guarantee immediate intake, they apologized. Possibly next week. Could you keep it stable until then? So Robert did exactly that. He watched the cub's legs slowly heal as the swelling subsided under his rudimentary care. Each day, the cub grew bolder, venturing to sniff at Robert's boots or nudge open a cupboard door. Yet it still exhibited caution, especially around loud sounds or sudden movements. One chilly afternoon, Robert gently carried the cub outside for some fresh air. At first, it huddled close to his legs, wide-eyed at the vastness of the world. Then, catching the scent of pine needles, it scampered a few feet ahead. Robert smiled, heart squeezed by the cub's tiny but determined spirit. Their interactions remained far from domesticated. The cub had sharp claws, and a single clumsy swipe left a scratch on Robert's forearm. He simply washed it, chastising himself for letting his guard down. But the bond unfolding between them was undeniable. In the cub's cautious, curious eyes, Robert glimpsed a reflection of his own longing for connection, for purpose, for a life less lonely. He still planned to hand the bear over to professionals. That was always the plan. Yet with each day, the mere thought of relinquishing it tightened his chest in a way he couldn't easily ignore. A week slipped by in a gentle blur of routine. Robert gave the cub a corner in his cabin, setting down a small blanket near the fireplace where it could nap without feeling confined. The wound on its paw knitted swiftly, and the bear grew more confident, sometimes too confident. Nosing around the kitchen, knocking over pots, or toppling a lamp, Robert found himself simultaneously exasperated and charmed. Yet the closeness they shared was not without its challenges. At night, Robert lay awake, guilt gnawing at him. He'd left multiple voicemails at the rehab facility, but they were swamped. The local conservation officer, a man named Curtis Rowe, was rumored to be on extended leave. The next nearest wildlife authority was nearly 3 hours away. While Robert waited, the bear continued to develop new attachments to him, to the cabin, to the routines of feeding that a wild animal should never rely on. Friends who occasionally visited Robert's cabin were shocked to see a bear cub waddling around. Most lectured him on the dangers of taming a wild creature. One friend, Mitchell, hissed in disbelief, "Rob, you're playing with fire. This thing's gonna double, triple in size before you know it." "Then what?" Robert bristled. "I'm not taming it," he insisted. "I'm just keeping it safe until professionals can take over." Deep down, though, he recognized the truth in Mitchell's words. The bond forming was no longer just caretaker and patient. It was something intangible, an emotional link that grew with each passing day. The cub began greeting him each morning with a soft grunt, and Robert responded with quiet words, feeling a protectiveness that startled him. Still, the forest whispered warnings. One afternoon, while chopping wood near the clearing, Robert noticed a set of adult bear tracks not far from his property. His stomach dropped. Could it be the cub's mother still searching, or a different bear prowling around the territory? And how would a wild adult bear react if it smelled Robert's scent intertwined with that of a cub? Such doubts plagued him. In the evenings, he scribbled notes in a journal, observations of the cub's behavior, feeding times, how the leg healed. He told himself this information might be crucial for the rehab center or for Officer Rowe whenever he returned. But privately, he found a quiet joy in the daily ritual of recording the cub's milestones. The first time it tried to climb a small log, how it grumbled in delight over fresh salmon scraps. The way it dozed in a patch of sunlight with an almost human-like sigh of contentment. Nature, however, is ruled by cycles far older than human compassion, and Robert sensed that with each day, the stakes rose. The cub was nearing 2 months old, at an age where maternal guidance would typically shape its survival instincts. If he couldn't find a solution soon, the line between wild and domesticated might blur irreparably. And then there were the looming threats from the outside world, poachers, or neighbors who might see the cub as a menace, or even government officials who might opt to euthanize rather than rehabilitate a bear too accustomed to humans. As the days lengthened into mild November evenings, Robert couldn't shake the feeling that fate was pushing him down a path from which there might be no easy return. and the quiet, questioning eyes of the bear seemed to ask, "What will become of me?" It was early November when Robert finally managed to contact Conservation Officer Curtis Rowe in person. After weeks on leave for medical reasons, Rowe returned to duty at the local outpost near Terrace. Hearing of Robert's predicament, he agreed to visit the cabin to assess the situation firsthand. Robert spent the morning tidying up, half wishing he could hide the evidence of the cub's presence. Paw prints tracked across the cabin floor, furniture bore scratch marks, and a lingering odor of fish clung to the air. He reasoned that honesty was best, though worry churned in his stomach at the thought of official censure. When Rowe's truck crunched up the gravel driveway, Robert stepped outside, hands shoved nervously into his jacket pockets. The officer, a lean man in his late 40s with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes, greeted him politely. "Heard you've been playing zookeeper, Thompson," he said, a trace of humor in his tone, but an undercurrent of seriousness. "Wasn't by choice," Robert said, shrugging. "I tried contacting rehab centers, didn't get far. Figured I'd keep it safe till someone could take over." Rowe nodded, stepping into the cabin. The cub, startled by the newcomer's presence, ambled behind a chair, peering out. Rowe's eyes swept the interior, taking in the blanket, the overturned bowls, the half-chewed wooden spoon. Sighing, he motioned for Robert to stand back as he approached the cub, quiet and measured. The bear hissed in alarm, but Rowe held out his gloved hand calmly. A tense minute passed before Rowe turned to Robert, face grim. "He's definitely grown accustomed to you. Not ideal. But let's see if the rehab can still handle him." Rowe stepped aside to place a call from his handheld radio, explaining the situation to someone on the other end. Robert's pulse hammered. He'd expected relief at the possibility of finally handing the bear over, but the thought of immediate separation hollowed his chest. The cub, for its part, let out a soft whine, creeping closer to Robert. After concluding the radio call, Rowe wore a thoughtful expression. "They're full again. Might be a few more weeks before they can transport him. They asked if you could continue care in the interim. But honestly, that's tricky. The longer he stays, the more he imprints on humans." Robert swallowed hard. "So what are the options?" Rowe sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Option 1, we forcibly remove him now. He might end up in a smaller facility, not specialized in bears. Could lead to euthanasia if deemed unfit for release. Option 2, you keep him a bit longer under strict guidelines, limit contact. No treats beyond what's absolutely necessary. The rehab center will do a final evaluation. If he's still a good candidate for the wild, they'll try to reintroduce him in spring." A wave of conflicting emotions roiled within Robert. The thought of losing the cub to an underprepared facility chilled him, yet continuing to host it was a bigger gamble every day. He looked at the bear, which blinked back, head tilted. "Officer, I'll do it," he murmured. "I'll keep him until the center's ready. I promise to follow your guidelines." Rowe clapped a hand on Robert's shoulder. "All right. I'll write up the arrangement in an official capacity. This is unusual, mind you, but given the circumstances, it might be the cub's best shot." That night, Robert sat on his porch, gazing at the dark silhouette of the forest. Relief mingled with dread. He'd been granted more time with the bear, time that might deepen their bond, but also risk greater heartbreak if things went awry. The hush of the pines provided no answers, only the soft rustle of wind, as though nature itself was holding its breath for what came next. Winter gradually tightened its grip on the British Columbia wilderness. Crisp mornings left a sheen of frost on pine needles, and the days shortened, dusk settling earlier each afternoon. Under Officer Rowe's supervision, Robert established a more structured regimen for the cub. He set strict feeding times and limited human interaction, doing his best to avoid outright taming. Yet despite these efforts, a closeness inevitably grew. The cub which Robert had quietly begun calling Harlan, started to respond to basic cues, following Robert's movements around the cabin like a curious shadow. When Robert returned from logging shifts, Harlan would greet him with soft grunts, sniffing his boots for new scents. The joyful innocence in the bear's dark eyes tugged at Robert's heart. At night, while the wind howled outside, Harlan curled up on the old blanket near the fireplace. Robert maintained a stoic demeanor, reminding himself this was temporary. But inwardly, each small sign of trust, like Harlan resting his head on Robert's boot while drifting off to sleep, felt like a gift. He was acutely aware that such trust could be a double-edged sword. Still, he saw progress in rewilding attempts. Officer Rowe arranged monthly visits to check on Harlan's growth. They set up a large outdoor pen behind the cabin so the bear could experience natural stimuli, logs to climb, shallow snow, drifts to explore. Robert placed pine cones, stones, and foraged berries around the pen, encouraging Harlan to explore scents and textures akin to wild conditions. Over time, the cub developed better muscle tone, showing a playful knack for problem-solving. Robert documented it all in the journal, each entry describing Harlan's changing diet and growing independence. Their evenings together remained quiet but meaningful. If Harlan ventured too close for comfort, sniffing at the couch or pawing at Robert's food, Robert would gently shoo him away, mindful of setting boundaries. Yet a silent bond thrived beneath these rules. Sometimes, Robert would catch Harlan gazing at him with a look that held both curiosity and affection. Meanwhile, Robert's personal life shifted. Colleagues at the logging company noticed a softening in him. He joked more readily, seemed less burdened. Friends still cautioned him about the potential heartbreak. "You're basically raising a wild bear," Rob Mitchell warned. "Don't get too attached. You know they have to take him away eventually." Robert only nodded, a pang of dread in his chest. He understood that come spring, the rehab center would likely claim Harlan for final reintroduction, severing this unlikely companionship. In the stillness of winter nights, while snow drifted outside, Robert sometimes questioned the path he'd chosen. He recalled the first sight of that wounded cub pinned beneath a fallen tree. Had that chance encounter lit a spark of compassion that no regulation could extinguish? And if so, how was he supposed to relinquish this little life once it was time? Regardless, the months wore on, each day building Harlan's strength. The question of how both man and bear would handle the inevitable separation loomed like a shadow at the cabin's threshold. Yet, for all the uncertainty, a quiet sense of purpose filled the cozy walls each night, a sense that in caring for Harlan, Robert was healing parts of himself he never knew were wounded. As winter progressed and icicles adorned the cabin's eaves, Harlan transitioned from a small, timid cub into a sturdy yearling. His once soft body developed lean muscle, and his curious nibbling turned into more assertive foraging behaviors. He'd tear open rotting logs in the pen to snack on insects, occasionally letting out playful growls that echoed with a newfound confidence. But along with growth came challenges. The lines between caretaker and companion blurred uncomfortably at times. Harlan's playful swipes with his paws became stronger, capable of leaving deep scratches in wood or even bruising Robert if he wasn't careful. Officer Rowe's check-ins reinforced the importance of never playing rough with the bear or allowing him to treat Robert like another bear. The goal was to keep Harlan's wild instincts alive, ensuring that once released, he could adapt without relying on humans. Occasionally, Robert discovered signs that Harlan was testing boundaries. One morning, he woke to find that the bear had pushed open a poorly latched door and rummaged through the kitchen in the night tipped-over trash bin, bits of leftover salmon scattered across the floor. Furious and frightened, Robert scolded Harlan, who cowered with a chastened grumble. Yet Robert's anger melted as quickly as it rose. He recognized that the blame lay partly on him for not securing the cabin better. He's a bear, after all, doing what bears do. Meanwhile, life outside the cabin grew complicated. Word of Robert's unusual guardianship spread among the local community. Some folks applauded his kindness, while others muttered about the dangers of a tamed bear roaming the area. Rumors swirled that if Harlan attacked livestock or rummaged in human garbage, authorities might shoot him on sight. The specter of tragedy hung in the air. One afternoon, a neighbor named Maggie Kincaid drove up unannounced, stepping onto the porch with a stern expression. She owned a small ranch nearby and had heard tales of Robert's bear. "I get it, you have a good heart," she said flatly, "but a half-tame grizzly is a danger waiting to happen. If he gets loose and tears apart a cow or, God forbid, injures someone, that's on you." Robert bristled. "He's not a grizzly, Maggie, he's a black bear. And I've done everything by the book." Officer Rowe checks in regularly. She folded her arms, unconvinced. "Even black bears can be dangerous. You can't keep him forever. One day, he'll break away from you or get shot by someone less understanding. Think carefully about this." Her words haunted Robert. He was already caught in an emotional limbo. Seeing Harlan flourish under his care filled him with pride, yet the closer they grew, the more he realized how fragile their arrangement was. The looming question, when will the rehab center be ready, remained unanswered. Spring was approaching, and with it the possibility of a call that would change everything. That evening, Robert sat on the porch steps, Harlan prowling in the outdoor pen behind him. Snow glistened under a waxing moon. He felt Maggie's warnings throbbing like a bruise. Harlan's future lay in the wild, that much was certain. But if the bear was too habituated to people, that future could be cut short by a single bullet. As a hush fell over the forest, Robert found himself whispering into the night, "We need more time, but time might be what destroys us both." The echo of his voice vanished among the pines, leaving only the silent moon overhead. Late February brought a gradual thaw, the snow receding into slushy patches that revealed damp earth and hardy shoots of greenery. The air smelled of rebirth, yet for Robert, each day carried the weight of looming deadlines. Harlan, now well over a year old, stretched the limits of the pen. He tested the chain-link fence, occasionally scratching or biting at the wires, as if drawn by the call of the wider forest. Finally, a sliver of hope arrived via a phone call from the Wildlife Rehab Center. The staff there, newly expanded, confirmed they could accept Harlan for a comprehensive rewilding program come March. They outlined steps: official transport, a medical evaluation, a large natural enclosure with minimal human interaction, culminating in a carefully monitored release into a suitable habitat. On the surface, it was everything Robert had prayed for, that Harlan's next phase would be guided by experts, maximizing his chance at a truly wild life. But as he hung up the phone, Robert's throat tightened. "This is good news," he told himself, yet an ache gnawed his chest. He couldn't deny how integral Harlan had become, part roommate, part friend, part ward. Each morning when Harlan lumbered to greet him, muzzle twitching, Robert's spirit lifted. He dreaded the emptiness of the cabin once that comforting presence was gone. Despite his inner turmoil, he prepared diligently for the cub's departure. Officer Rowe helped arrange the necessary paperwork. They scheduled a day for the rehab team to send a truck equipped with a tranquilizer kit to ensure a calm, safe relocation. Robert even built a wooden transport crate, sturdy enough to hold a restless bear. In the days leading up to the handover, Robert tried to maintain emotional distance. He reinforced the boundary that Harlan should remain in the pen more often, only entering the cabin briefly for medical checks or feeding. It pained him to see the bear pace near the fence, occasionally letting out a plaintive huff as if asking, "Why can't I come in?" Yet Robert stood firm. Better for them both, he reasoned, to re-establish the line between man and beast. At night, though, when the wind rattled the cabin's shutters, he found himself wide awake, memories swirling. He recalled the day he freed Harlan from that fallen cedar trunk, the fear in the cub's eyes replaced by relief once its leg was bandaged. The trust that bloomed between them felt like a rare gift in an often cold world. On the final evening before the rehab center's arrival, Robert let Harlan inside for a short while to say a quiet goodbye. The bear ambled through the familiar cabin space, sniffing corners and gazing at Robert with curious eyes. Robert knelt, resting a hand briefly on Harlan's broadening back. "You'll be okay," he murmured, voice trembling. Harlan nuzzled his palm, making a soft grunt that tugged at every heartstring Robert possessed. Then he led Harlan back to the pen. Once the bear was secure, Robert lingered by the fence in the twilight, tears stinging his eyes. The forest bristled with half-bare branches, the hush profound. Tomorrow he would do the right thing, and yet the sense of impending loss pressed down on him like a weight he wasn't sure he could carry. The morning arrived with a wan sun peeking through low clouds, as if hesitant to fully illuminate the day's events. By 9 a.m., a rehab center truck rumbled up Robert's driveway, accompanied by two specialists, Elena and Marcus, both wearing calm but purposeful expressions. Officer Rowe joined them, nodding politely at Robert, who stood stiffly on the porch, arms folded tight over his chest. Together, they approached Harlan's pen. The bear watched from the far corner, ears perked, uncertain of these strangers. Elena carried a tranquilizer rifle, which she explained was a mild dose enough to sedate Harlan for a short ride, but not so strong as to cause complications. Robert's stomach knotted, remembering how Harlan hated needles during the last medical check. As Marcus prepared the crate, Robert steeled himself. "I'll do whatever helps," he said, voice taut. "Just be gentle with him." Elena gave him a sympathetic look. "We will. This is about giving him the best shot at a wild life." Her tone was kind but firm. She'd done this many times and understood the emotional strain. They decided to avoid a forced chase in the pen that could heighten Harlan's stress. Instead, Robert entered, coaxing Harlan closer with a calm presence. The bear ambled over, curious about the new gear lying around. Heart pounding, Robert offered a small morsel of fish to keep Harlan's attention. In that moment, Elena fired the tranquilizer dart. It lodged into Harlan's shoulder with a soft paft. Alarmed, the bear let out a startled growl, spinning to face Elena. But sedation began to flood its system, so Harlan's limbs wobbled. Robert spoke soothingly, stroking the bear's back as it sank onto the straw-laden ground. Anxiety warred with heartbreak in Robert's chest, tears threatening to blur his vision. Once Harlan was sedated, Marcus and Rowe helped lift him onto a stretcher. The bear's weight surprised them, a testament to how healthy and strong he'd become. They gently guided him into the wooden transport crate, ensuring the door latched securely. The crate was then loaded onto the truck, each thud of the tailgate hammering at Robert's resolve. Standing by the truck, Robert laid a trembling hand on the crate. Through a small vent, he could glimpse Harlan's dark fur, rising and falling with each breath. Elena placed a hand on Robert's shoulder. "We'll keep you updated," she murmured. "He'll be in our large enclosure with minimal human contact. Over time, we'll teach him to forage for wild foods. If all goes well, in a few months, he'll be released in a remote area far from human settlements, so he can thrive." Words caught in Robert's throat. He finally managed to say, "Thank you. Please, take care of him." He stepped back, arms limp at his sides, as the truck rolled away, tires crunching across gravel. A sense of finality hung in the air, as though a key chapter had closed with deafening quiet. Officer Rowe lingered briefly, offering a nod of sympathy before driving off. And then Robert was alone. The pen stood empty, its chain-link gate rattling in the wind. The cabin felt hollow, the hush of the forest no longer comfort but echoing loss. He slumped onto the porch step, burying his face in his hands, allowing the tears he'd fought to finally surface. He told himself he'd done the right thing, that Harlan's chance at a real bear's life outweighed any fleeting companionship they shared. But in the raw aftermath, it felt like a piece of his soul had departed along with that old pickup, leaving an ache that pulsed like an open wound. Spring melted winter's grip from the land, unfurling new greens and bright wildflowers. But Robert's world remained tinged with sadness. The empty pen behind his cabin mocked him each day with its silence. No more playful growls, no more scuffles as a curious bear knocked over his tools. The calm that once comforted him now seemed suffocating. He tried to occupy himself with longer hours at the logging site. When he returned home, he'd busy his hands fixing old fences, repainting the cabin's porch, or tending a small vegetable patch, anything to stave off the loneliness creeping in. He often found himself glancing at the phone, half hoping for an update from Elena or the rehab center. But calls were scarce apparently. They had many animals to care for and minimal staff time for constant updates. Weeks stretched into months. The once lush memories of feeding Harlan at dawn or seeing the bear doze in a sunbeam felt dreamlike. At times Robert questioned if it had truly happened. Perhaps his longing inflated it into something bigger than reality. But then he'd spot a faint scratch on the cabin's doorframe or a crumpled toy in the corner, remnants of a presence that once meant everything to him. In early May, he finally received a short email from the rehab center. Harlan adjusting well, eating solid foods, minimal approach to humans. Next step in a few weeks, transport to a large, fenced, natural reserve for final rewilding. Thank you for your patience. Reading the note lit a spark of relief in Robert's heart. Harlan was alive, forging ahead. Yet the brevity of the message stung. He longed for details. Did the bear still remember him? Did he sleep peacefully at night? One evening, feeling the pang of emptiness more keenly, Robert ventured into the forest behind his property. He followed a narrow path that meandered near the creek where he'd once planned to fish that fateful day. The day he found Harlan, the water gurgled softly, as if whispering secrets of life and loss. He crouched near the bank, recalling how a single moment of compassion had reshaped his world. A sense of gratitude mingled with sorrow. Caring for Harlan had awakened a dormant part of him, call it paternal instinct, or simply love for a living creature in need. That bond had fueled him through lonely winters, giving him purpose. But it also made the current solitude feel more acute. Like a missing limb, he could still feel phantom sensations from. He tossed a pebble into the creek, watching ripples distort the reflection of pines overhead. As the sky deepened to twilight, he murmured a silent prayer for Harlan's successful return to the wild, for the bear's safety and freedom. A part of him realized that, in letting go, he'd not only freed Harlan, but also confronted his own capacity for sacrifice. Yet he couldn't escape the sense that something remained unfinished, that a final thread of fate still bound them together in the vast tapestry of these woods. In mid-June, as the sun lingered late in the sky, Robert received an unexpected phone call from Elena. Her voice crackled with excitement. "We've transferred Harlan to a release site, a protected reserve about 80 miles north. He's doing exceptionally well. We plan to open the enclosure in a couple of weeks to let him roam freely. Would you like to come observe?" Robert's hand tightened on the receiver. His pulse throbbed with a mix of longing and caution. Observing Harlan's release might offer closure, but it also risked dredging up fresh pain. Still, the urge to see the bear one last time proved overwhelming. Softly, he agreed. The morning of the release dawned bright and warm. Robert drove hours north, winding through forested backroads until he reached the designated reserve. A gated entrance led to a stretch of pristine woodland dotted with tall grass and scattered pines. Elena greeted him, along with a small group of wildlife staff. They led him to a vantage point near the enclosure's perimeter fence, a robust structure designed to keep the bear inside until the final step. He spotted Harlan from afar, wandering the spacious compound, pawing at logs in search of insects. Even at a distance, Robert recognized the bear's glossy coat, the distinctive patch of lighter fur on his shoulder, a vestige of the healing scab from long ago. His heart soared, then clenched. Harlan looked strong, confident, moving like a true bear of the wild. Elena explained the plan. They would open a gate leading to a vast forest corridor. Once Harlan discovered the exit, he could explore at will, presumably leaving captivity behind forever. Staff would monitor from a distance, using tracking collars, ensuring no immediate threats hindered him. When the moment came, a staff member activated the gate. Metal groaned, and the barrier slid aside, revealing an unguarded path into open woods. At first, Harlan ignored it, busy uprooting a stump. Tension built among the watchers. Then, as if sensing a shift, the bear ambled closer to the newly opened passage. Robert's breath caught. He braced himself to remain unseen behind the camouflage of a small observation blind. Harlan stepped forward, muzzle twitching at scents carried on the breeze. In a few tentative strides, he crossed the threshold beyond the fence, free at last. He paused, scanning the trees, an almost regal posture in the golden sunlight. To everyone's surprise, the bear then turned, glancing toward the observation area. It was as though Harlan sensed watchers beyond the fence. Robert, heart pounding, leaned forward just enough that his silhouette might be visible. Their eyes met across the distance. In that instant, time dissolved. Man and bear, once caretaker and ward, now separated by so much more than wire. Robert felt tears prick his eyes, the memory of nights by the fireplace flooding back. Harlan let out a soft chuff, an unreadable blend of curiosity and farewell. Then, with a flick of his ears, he strode into the forest, disappearing among the shadows and sun-dappled ferns. A hush fell over the group. Elena exhaled, murmuring, "He's really gone into the wild." Robert stayed rooted, tears slipping down his cheeks. It was the closure he'd imagined, but it struck deeper than he could handle. He had no idea that fate still had one more twist to deliver, a final meeting that would change everything. The weeks following Harlan's release were a blur of mixed emotions. Robert tried to focus on work, telling himself that the bear was thriving. Elena occasionally shared vague updates from the tracking collar. Harlan roamed well beyond the release site, exploring ridges and valleys that few humans ever ventured into. The idea comforted Robert, imagining Harlan free, living the life nature intended. But an unspoken emptiness gnawed at him. He immersed himself in new projects, refurbishing the cabin's roof, carving small wooden figures to pass time. Still, each night he found himself gazing into the forest, half expecting to see a familiar black shape lumbering out of the darkness. One late August evening, he decided to hike a trail north of his cabin, searching for a rumored fishing spot along a secluded stream. Dusk settled into an indigo sky by the time he reached the water's edge, a tranquil swirl of clear currents. As he cast a line, the hush of twilight lulled him into a contemplative state. That's when he heard a soft rustle from the underbrush, followed by the quiet snap of twigs. Alarm flickered. Could it be a wandering bear, or just a deer? He turned, adrenaline pricking his veins. A moment later, a large silhouette emerged from behind a cluster of spruce. Even in the low light, Robert recognized the distinctive coat, the patch of lighter fur on one shoulder. His heart seized. Harlan. The bear stood just yards away, chest rising and falling in labored breaths. A glimmer of recognition sparked in Harlan's eyes as he stared at Robert, muzzle parted. Relief and awe flooded Robert until he noticed something was terribly wrong. A slick sheen of blood stained the bear's flank, matting the fur near the hind quarter. Fresh, bright red. Harlan swayed, letting out a low moan of pain. "Oh God," Robert breathed, pulse skyrocketing. He dropped his fishing rod and took a half step forward. Harlan responded with a trembling grunt, as if he'd dragged himself here in desperation. Had he been shot? Attacked by another bear? Cautiously, Robert approached, voice cracking. "It's okay, buddy. Let me look." Harlan sank to his haunches, eyes fluttering with exhaustion. By the faint moonlight, Robert saw a ragged bullet wound. The stench of gunpowder and coppery blood hung in the air. Rage and despair warred in him. This was no accident. Tears blurred his vision as he kneeled beside Harlan. The bear tried to lift his head, but only a pitiful groan escaped. Robert pressed a trembling hand to the wound, hopelessly aware he had no medical supplies, no immediate rescue. The nearest road was miles away. A single, choked sob tore from Robert's throat. This can't be happening. In that final moment, Harlan rested his massive head against Robert's arm, shuddering with each shallow breath. Robert cradled the bear's muzzle, tears spilling unheeded as he whispered incoherent reassurances. Under a silent canopy of stars, life ebbed from Harlan's eyes, leaving Robert trembling with grief. He held the bear's limp form until the last breath slipped away, the forest an indifferent witness. No words could capture the torrent of sorrow and outrage surging through him. Harlan's improbable journey had ended where it began, in a quiet clearing, with Robert by his side. But the final cruelty of human violence had stolen any hope of a peaceful, free life for the bear they both had fought to save. And in that moment, Robert found himself utterly speechless, heart shattered by the ruthless fragility of love and life in the wild. Thank you for sharing in this deeply moving story, a testament to the delicate balance between compassion and the wild. Robert's choice to save an orphan bear cub and the profound bond they forged reminds us how one act of kindness can reshape two destinies. Yet as we've seen, nature often takes turns that leave us breathless with grief and awe. If this story touched your heart, please like the video to show your support and share it with others who appreciate stories about the deep connections that can form between humans and wildlife. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more immersive narratives that celebrate resilience, personal growth, and the raw beauty of the natural world. Together, we can keep these tales alive and perhaps inspire more compassion and responsibility toward the creatures that share our planet. The wild may be harsh, but with empathy, we can ensure its wonders endure.